So I used clairvoyance, looked at her wrist, and I also saw underneath the tendons a healed bone fracture. And it looked quite old. It had been there for a while. And it showed me a little movie of her life. And that's not unusual. That's something you hear intuitives say all the time. And what it showed me was her at about age 5. She was holding that same wrist up in front of her face for protection. And I saw what looked like a cane or stick striking her right here. She was in a dark closet with clothes around her, and a woman was wielding this cane. And she stopped me and she said, "My mother was mentally ill. She used to beat me with her cane and lock me in a closet." She corroborated that one, which was really fascinating. And again, what her wrist was showing us was this history of this spot in her wrist, like this weakness where this pain and trauma had existed that flared at these various points in her life. And that was so fascinating to follow that trail to the origin point of a health issue that was somewhat chronic for her, right? But for the most part, that was a very emotionally based issue. And so she took that information off. She went 2 days later, she called me and she said, "My wrist is completely fine." And 2 days, and she said, "My wrist is fine." She was able to process the emotions, realized what her body was trying to tell her. And she then started to process that. And that's what lightened up the pain in the wrist and helped it start to heal.
So what if your body could speak and someone could actually hear it? Today's guest is Wendy Coulter. Wendy is a medical intuitive who's changing how we understand health. And no, she's not a fortune teller. What's very cool about Wendy is that she trains doctors, nurses, clinicians across the country in a skill once dismissed as mystical. Now it's being backed by science. So Wendy Coulter is the founder of The Practical Path, where she runs one of the only accredited certification programs in medical intuition. She is also the president of the National Organization for Medical Intuition, and her groundbreaking research has been published in peer-reviewed medical journals. And her book, Essentials of Medical Intuition, has won multiple awards for its contribution to the mind-body connection. But behind all this is a deep personal story, a story worth listening, and of trusting of what we can't see with the human eye, and pioneering this path in medicine that many really never saw come. So please welcome Wendy Coulter.
Hey, Jason. Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Wendy, for coming on. It's been a while, but I'm so happy to finally have this conversation. And I know we met couple moons ago at another conference. So I love reconnecting with professionals like you and sort of explaining the science behind the mystical, or what I like to say, the mind-body connection, and with the medical intuition piece, which I'm so interested, because before meeting you, I really didn't have any understanding of it. But before we get all into about medical intuition, can you help the audience kind of understand your journey into this? Before Wendy Coulter was an author, the president of the National Organization for Medical Intuition, what was that Wendy like for us?
Well, my history goes back a long way, but when it comes to this work, I was always interested in energy, healing, things like that. I don't think I could have told you as a child how I could look at somebody and kind of get a sense of how they were feeling, like physically feeling and emotionally feeling. But that was a big part of my history, as just being kind of an intuitive kid. And I was luckily raised in a family where that wasn't shut down immediately. So I had the opportunity to kind of feel okay about it and think that this was just a part of something I could do, something I had. And it wasn't until later in life that I became an energy healer, working with Reiki and other forms of energy healing, which was just always an interest for me, aside from whatever else I did in life. And I found that as I was working with my clients, I was getting very strong visual impressions. I could see, so to speak, intuitively right into their physiology, their anatomy. I could also see into their life history and what the origin or roots of the issues were, not just physical, but also life history, emotions, things like that. It's fascinating. And the thing that really turned the corner for me in that respect was I noticed that some of my clients would have wonderful experiences and they'd get great healings and they'd feel great. And then they'd come back and they'd have the same issues all over again, right? So it wasn't
Mm.
a one and done with some of my clients. Some clients were able to release a whole lot, some were not, based on, the energy practice. And I thought, well, I wonder what's going on here. Why is somebody coming back again and again with something they're unable to let go of or release, or the body's holding on to? And so I asked one of my clients, could I just sit for a little bit and just assess whatever I can and determine or discern from your own body systems and your own energy field, and see if there's information there that might get to the root cause, or why something is being held on to. And that ended up being like an hour and a half consultation with no energy healing at all. And the client would just love it. They'd eat it up. They're like, wow, that's really fascinating. They'd resonate with it. It would make sense to them. And from what their body was asking for, that was really helpful for them, because they could basically hear what their body was saying, right? And so these mysteries became less mysterious, right? In terms of why something was being held on to. And then when I would do an energy healing, I noticed that in most cases, they were able to release things on a deeper level, having heard the information and having it brought to their conscious awareness. And that was a turning point for me. I realized that there was something here in medical intuition. I didn't call it that at the time. Um, that was very powerful for my clients, that had an effect on their ability to release a health issue and an emotional issue, and something that had been sticking in their mind, a mental issue and even a spiritual issue. And then when they started telling their doctors about me and their doctors started calling me for consultations for their patients, I realized that this is something special and unique and really deserved some more attention.
Can you help us really understand what it means by medical intuition? And can someone be actually trained to develop medical intuition? Because I know that from my understanding, right, it almost seems like developing intuition is sort of if you have a gift, right? If you have a
Yeah.
natural skill at it in the beginning, right? If you're a layperson that has no other experience, it would be very difficult for you to. So can really anyone be trained in this?
The answer to can anyone be trained is absolutely yes. I have trained skeptics. I've trained people who say, I've never had an intuitive bone in my body. Like people who don't recognize their own intuition. But my feeling about this, and I'm not the only one, is that of people who are practicing intuitives, we know that it is not a special gift. It's hardwired into all of us. We all are born with intuition. The way I explain it is, when children are very young, they tend to often, not always, but often show like a proclivity for something, right? Sports or math or art or something like that. The children who display a proclivity for intuition, there's no place for that, right? So even though we all have it, sometimes someone is more naturally drawn to it. And that's kind of what we see. And that's why we think people have to have a special gift, but they don't. So the question is, even if you can't, bounce a ball or hit a ball or something, you could practice and be trained in how to do that, right? Even if you think you can't draw, you could take classes and be trained and learn how to do that. And that's the same principle as developing one's intuition. Is there the desire or the need or really the desire to develop it? If there is, there's all kinds of ways you can develop it. And if you want to develop this very unique skill called medical intuition, I am among, a few trainers on the planet who who teach this in a very focused way. And yes, of course. I mean, I've taught people who come into this saying, I don't even recognize myself as intuitive. Can I learn this? And the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I think I resonate with that so much, Wendy, because my end, I come from, the energy world, the energy practice, the
Yeah.
biofield, and I say the same things, right? It's like learning to ride a bike or, swimming, right? You're not gonna, just jump into a pool and start, doing freestyle, but you kind of have to get yourself into the waters, learn how to float, learn how to tread water, and that's the same thing. what I'm hearing is that everyone can learn this, right? And be applied in a practical, structured way.
Absolutely. And the other thing to remember is everybody gets a gut feeling, right? A gut feeling or a sense or a inner knowing, that just that little something that we don't really know what to call is really in your intuition speaking to you. And
Mm,
so the question there is, are you acknowledging it as that? And if you are,
yeah.
do you want to develop it further? Because, gut feelings, hunches, mother's intuition, look, physician's intuition, come on, that's actually out there. Nurses talk about it all the time. Physicians don't talk about it, but they understand it, right? You get a gut feeling about a patient or a client. That is the spark, the really the kernel, the seed of your intuitive ability. And so being able to develop it, practice it, and there's half a dozen kinds of intuition, probably more. It doesn't matter if it's a feeling sense, a thinking sense, a hearing sense, you name it. It still comes from that same hardwired intuitive ability that we all have as human beings. I think
Yeah.
animals have it too, but
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, for
Yeah, I
sure.
feel like animals do it the best when we talk about gut instincts, right? They kind of know it before it happens, especially,
Yeah,
people with pets
absolutely.
and cats and dogs. Which gets me to sort of my next question, right? Because you've developed programs and workshops, and you've even written a book, right?
Mhm,
Essentials of Medical Intuition: A
mhm,
Visionary Path to Wellness. So, you know, after doing all these courses and your book, and what's sort of like a couple of key takeaways for the audience? Because I feel like we started on the topic of the gut feeling, but when you
mhm.
talk about seeing things with your eyes, and picking up on precognitive information, and maybe, about the past and different families and individuals and emotions, that can scale up to something that is very, very big, that, for a lot of skeptics, as you mentioned, can be almost overwhelming. So can you kind of give us a path towards how can we start with our gut feeling, and how does that kind of evolve? How does the training evolve to kind of accommodate these pieces that you're talking about, where some of this information might seem a little extraordinary?
Well, when you get started in this, it all seems extraordinary because how would you know, right? So I can give you one takeaway here that I think is really important for all, particularly people in the healthcare field, to understand. When developing your intuition, you have to set aside your the common word for this is bias. You have to
Mm,
get rid of bias because that will interfere with your intuition more than anything else. Um, and that's a challenge. That's actually the learning curve for the healthcare providers in my program, because they
mm,
have a lot of knowledge and they use their knowledge every day. And if they don't use their knowledge, someone could get hurt, right? So they have to rely on that learned knowledge and experience. And there's a real misunderstanding in the healthcare world about even the word intuition. Some people have written extensively on, well, it must be about learned knowledge that's just an experience hiding in your subconscious mind, right? Or it must be about, visual cues or something like that. None of that actually is intuition. That's subconscious information that you pull up like your computer brain can do. Intuition is not having any knowledge at all or experience at all with either a person and their life history or their medical history or their healthcare, or um, just the practice of doing this, right? So as a medical intuitive, and in the book I write about, and I've interviewed many intuitives and medical intuitives and asked them for their experience as well. No information, no knowledge base, no nothing about what we see. And that bears out in the research that I've been able to do. And that is that, can I talk about the research
yes,
now? Because it
please.
kind of
Yeah.
underscores this. Yeah. So in 2019, it was published in 2020 in the Journal of Integrative and Complementary Medicine. We took 5 of my graduates who had just completed the program. It's a 1-year program, by the way. They just finished their program. And, for years, I've known how right on our students are with, reading strangers and, people they've never met before. And so we thought, well, let's test this out. So I worked with a colleague at the University of California, San Diego. And it's a qualitative study where we asked the participants their impressions and their understanding and how the accuracy level of our graduates, our medical intuitives, certified medical intuitives. We had 67 participants from the community in San Diego, some of whom were patients at UCSD Medical. Again, we do no health intake. We see no records, no medical records, none of that. They're what you would call a cold reading, just going on in and doing our job. Our medical intuitives keep their eyes closed, so we didn't have any visual cues at all. So there was another level of blindedness. And we came out with 94% accuracy of the medical intuitives locating and evaluating their primary health issue. Just right off the bat, which is phenomenal. We also received 98% accuracy rate for the medical intuitives describing life experience that may have led to the health issues. Again, very specific incidents from someone's life described to them that registered as extremely accurate to them. We had a whole bunch of great results from this, but the other one I want to mention here is we asked the participants that had a known diagnosis from their healthcare provider, and about half of them did. And we asked how consistent was the medical intuitive in describing your issue with that medical diagnosis. And we got a 94% accuracy rate there, consistency, 94% consistent with that in the way it was described, which again, that's phenomenal. And really perked up the ears of a lot of folks in the medical world. They said, well, we don't get those kinds of numbers. How are you doing that?
Right.
Which was fabulous. And we've just gone on from there. Now, I will say that study that we did, even though it was, a relatively small qualitative study, was the first research published and peer-reviewed and published on medical intuition in more than 20 years. And that's saying something, because there should be a whole lot more study on this.
Yeah. That's what you call a landmark study right there. So thank you for initiating that, Wendy. And like you said, those numbers are really shocking, right? To the average skeptic, to conventional healthcare practitioners, when they hear things like 94% accuracy, like that, some diagnostic tests aren't even that accurate, right? So what is the reaction from practitioners, from doctors, from researchers, scientists? I'm sure you get a whole spectrum of reactions. What is the common response do you hear from them when you tell them this type of data?
Well, two things. Number one, first of all, don't forget that I've been working very closely with and in the integrative and functional healthcare world. And these are folks who's, physicians and practitioners whose ears are already open to things that are not strictly conventional. They're looking at other options and other ways of healthcare. What's so wonderful about medical intuition is that it's not a method or a modality. It's a foundational assessment tool, right? Or skill, you could say. It's a foundational skill, being able to assess. And when the physicians in particular, and the NPs, and the diagnosticians and the clinicians, when they hear about the research and the uses of it, and the stories, the case studies, and all the rest of it, their eyes get big, because it's exciting to them that they can help their patients in a deeper way that not only includes body, mind, spirit connection, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, but also just the nuts and bolts of getting a diagnosis, nailing a diagnosis from the start, or as close to it as you can get, right? And medical intuition isn't 100% foolproof. 94% isn't 100%, right? But it can help the diagnostician get more information based on the medical intuitive's perceptions and information that they can gather from the physiology and the anatomy. That is hugely valuable. And just that alone, when it comes to healthcare, could really shift the paradigm. It's like, let's just get right to it. The medical mystery becomes not a mystery, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll say this. I started, almost 20, well, I guess about 20 years ago, a little more than that now. And I was seeing things in patients, and I still do see things in patients, well, not my patient, my clients' um, physiology and anatomy and connections and relationships within the body that 20 years ago was not available, at least not to the public, right? You think about research 20 years ago when it comes to gut brain health, the role of the gut in the function of the brain and all that. Uh, Not super known. And yet medical intuitives have been seeing these relationships between various systems and the interactions between them that medical science has not gotten there yet, right? Or it has been slow to get there by comparison. We'll see it, we'll see it. There may not be any information out there. I'll tell you what, I'm a Google fan, because at the end of a session, and when I see a connection between something, a relationship, or something that could assist someone in a very tricky healthcare situation, and it shows up, I'm delighted. I'll get on Google and I'll see where that research is. And sometimes it's very nascent research, or, it's like something that is just barely scratching the surface. And that's very exciting, very exciting,
Mm.
because it means that something, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it means that medical intuitives are discerning things that really go beyond, kind of the empirical idea of science. We're able to discern these things that can make it into science. And if you don't mind, I'll also continue and say the connection with adverse childhood experiences, meaning early life trauma leading to later life health issues, and not just, addiction or depression, but actually physiological issues. Medical intuitives have been seeing that for 200 years, right?
Yeah, and
And
across the board, right? Not just what we're talking about here in the Western Hemisphere, but like in the East and
oh,
native indigenous practices. It's
of
it's been around
course.
for hundreds, thousands of
Oh,
years.
it's as long as there have been humans.
Yeah,
And so the fact that, the ACEs, ACES, and psychoneuroimmunology and all these wonderful new, scientific perspectives on it, what it does is it confirms what medical intuitives and healers and shamans and you name it have been discerning for generations, for millennia, really. There's another study I worked on with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. It's as yet unpublished, but it is in peer review at the moment. So we're very excited about that. We wanted to pair a medical intuitive with a doctor and a patient, and the patient would be a patient who has issues that have been undiagnosed, are difficult to diagnose, or chronic issues that haven't resolved. And so we had 5 medical intuitives, 6 doctors, and easily 8 to 10 of their patients. And we did these the same way as cold readings. And the results, which I can't talk about in specific, but in general, I can tell you they were phenomenal. We wanted to find out if the doctors felt there was value in the working with a medical intuitive on behalf of their patients. Would they hear things that could help them with their diagnostics, with their prescriptions, with their treatment plans? And I can tell you the results were very good and excellent. We're very excited about them. And when that study comes out, I will absolutely let you know. And we'll probably be, yelling it from the rooftops pretty much, because it's definitely a missing piece and can definitely help. We hope it will help bring medical intuitives into healthcare when they see the value that it can bring.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredible because I think, and I really come at this from the angle of course, you know, this energy component, this intuition component is really a top down view of health, versus science and conventional medicine is the bottom up approach, right? You kind of have
That's
to
a good
have
way to
these
say it.
fine granular details, and we can see it, we can observe it, we can measure it. But the things that you're talking about, right? Intuition and picking things up and then seeing it almost with a sixth sense, almost it's harder to quantify. And like you mentioned, fields like psychoneuroimmunology has made a lot of this much more digestible, right? For the mainstream science out there. So can you help us, Wendy, sort of ground us with a case study that you've seen from your years of experience? What's one case study that kind of pops up to your head and kind of really encompasses the power and the benefit of medical intuition.
Oh, I have a couple of them. Yeah, I'm inclined to tell the more dramatic one. This isn't necessarily about the mind body. This is about the body. But I have another one I can tell you in a moment here. But the one that I thought was really, um, really paradigm changing for me personally, as soon as after I had this experience with a client, I really realized that medical intuition needed to be in medicine. Um, this was a young woman. This was early in my practice. Uh, in her early 20s, I'm here in Los Angeles, aspiring actress, vivacious young woman. She had been suffering with back pain, crippling back pain, for quite a while, at least almost 6 months, something like that. And she'd gone to every doctor she could find and specialist. They couldn't find the reason for it. And remember the timing here. This is quite a while ago. And she was not able, she was suffering from depression too, and certainly a lot of pain. So what the doctors did, since they couldn't find a reason for it, is they gave her they gave her opioids for the pain that she was obviously experiencing, and they gave her antidepressants, and they told her it was psychosomatic. I mean, that was the diagnosis. It's in your mind. Now, her parents called me, and I had one session with her. And in that, literally the first 5 or 10 minutes, it was almost instantaneous. I saw in one of her kidneys a tiny little shard forming, and then it moved out of the kidney and lodged itself in the top of the ureter tube. Now, what do I know about kidneys and ureter tubes? Nothing. Okay. But I saw it. And so there it was, like, sticking in there. It wasn't moving. And it was enough to cause her a great deal of pain. But it turns out, I didn't find out till later, at the time, the diagnostic imaging that was available, it was too small to be picked up by that. But I saw it, and she certainly felt it. And so my job as a medical intuitive is to ask the body, what do you need for this to change? What has to happen here for this to shift? And her very clearly, her kidney said, surgeon, go see a surgeon. This needs a surgeon. And I'm like, okay, you sure? Can't she just drink 3 gallons of water? No, needs a surgeon. And so I wrote it out. I drew her a picture of where it was, exactly what it was. And I said, see if you can find a specialist here that will listen and take your case and do further look. And I didn't find out what happened to her for a couple of years, but her parents reached out to me. And what happened for her was, she did find, not long after our session, she found a surgeon who was willing to take her case, did some exploratory, found it, did a procedure, whatever they did. She was out of pain. Sadly and tragically, she had become addicted to the opioids, and she died of an overdose not long after that. And they were devastated. And as soon as I found out, I was absolutely devastated. And it made me think, what is this skill useful for? You can use it as a parlor trick. It can be some funny little thing you do. But guess what? It can also save lives. And had her doctors been able to consult openly and, above board with a medical intuitive, would she still be alive today? And my feeling is, yeah, most likely. Why not? And what is this skill set, and how can it be integrated into healthcare so that this doesn't happen again? And I want to tell you, Jason, every professional medical intuitive that's been working for a number of years has a similar well, I hope not that somebody died of an overdose, but a similar kind of a story of literally saving a life, right? Saving health, by just what they were able to discern for their client, so their client could get the help they needed. So I don't diagnose. I'm not licensed to do that. I don't prognose, not licensed to do that, and prescribe. But what I can do is give information so that the client has something to take to get the help, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's huge, right? And to, I'm sure we've all heard of stories of someone being touched by, opioid overdose, and it's really
Oh,
really tragic to the way that you put it, because it's exactly that, right? The whole point of medicine is not only to treat the person, but you want to treat them correctly, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people get categorized under this umbrella, like you mentioned, psychosomatic,
Yeah.
fibromyalgia, right? It's just in your head, in your mind. We can't do anything, right? We've tried our best. I'm sure millions of people would benefit uh, from this, and
Yeah.
when you tell me that, light bulbs just go off my head. I'm like, oh my god, this can really bring back health in a way that's integrative, that's whole, right? That incorporates all aspects of the mind body connection in which you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that was a very physical component. You said you mentioned you had a couple others.
Yeah, I'll tell you another one. And I wrote a lot of them in the book. And I also, like I said, gathered many of my colleagues, and we're also doing some outreach into the community, the National Organization for Medical Intuition, along with Rodrigo Bravo, and his work, another wonderful colleague of yours and mine. And what that's about is gathering case studies, how clinicians have interacted with medical intuitives or used medical intuition on their own, how our professional medical intuitives have worked with clinicians and with their own clients. And this case study information seems to be lacking out there. And that alone, we feel, can help move the needle in terms of the uses in a clinical setting, right? So let me give you this case study. This was a middle, well, I guess about in the mid 40s, businesswoman, very active, very, full of life. And she'd had tendonitis for about a month. Tendonitis isn't life threatening, right? But it was really persistent, and nothing she was doing was getting rid of it. And so she'd been to her doctors and her acupuncturist, and she'd done all that jazz, and it was still there. And so she asked me to take a look at it. So what I did was, and by the way, I didn't explain my certain process because there are many different processes and styles of medical intuition. Mine is using the visual sight, like visual intuitive sight. There's a word for it that you can clear a room of doctors in about a nanosecond if you say it. It's called clairvoyance, which is a French word meaning clear seeing. Okay, that's all it means. And you've heard of the clairs, clairsentience, clairvoyance, clair this, clair that. So I use clairvoyance because I want to see what's going on in the workings of the body system, because that was an obvious thing to me. If you're going to be a medical intuitive, you better know what a liver looks like and it's what it's supposed to do, right? So I looked at her wrist, and what I saw were inflamed tendons, a thing you would typically see, if you imaged it. And I also saw underneath the tendons a healed bone fracture, and it looked quite old. It had been there for a while. And so this is my job is I have a conversation with the body, as I said. It's kind of like, what's going on here? What happened? Why is this happening? And it showed me a little movie of her life. And that's not unusual. That's something you hear intuitives say all the time. I just kind of watch a little movie. And what it showed me was her about age 20, playing tennis with her boyfriend. And she swung her racket and she tripped and fell and broke her wrist, broke that wrist. And that's what that healed scar was about, that healed bone fracture. Now, the next scene it showed me was her and her boyfriend in the emergency room. She was getting her wrist, she worked on, taped up and whatnot. And he broke up with her right there in the room. And what her wrist was showing us was that and by the way, I also saw this big cloud of emotion all around it when I first looked. So it was just physical and emotional, something in there, right? So the body had held both the physical, the pain and trauma of the physical fracture, and also the pain and trauma of the emotional breakup right there in the wrist. Now, interestingly, sometimes clients know exactly what you're talking about. And she corroborated that story. And then she said, oh my God, my partner broke up with me about a month ago, just before my wrist flared up. Right now, her wrist, there was no other reason for it. She hadn't been using it a lot. There was no obvious thing there for her except for that. And that was very potent for her. Now, her wrist wanted to show us some more. So the next thing I saw in her wrist was her at about age 5. She was holding that same wrist up in front of her face for protection, and I saw what looked like a cane or stick striking her right here. She was in a dark, like, closet with clothes around her, and a woman was wielding this cane. And she stopped me and she said, "My mother was mentally ill. she used to beat me with her cane and lock me in a closet. She corroborated that one, which was really fascinating. And again, what her wrist was showing us was this history of this spot in her wrist, like this weakness where this pain and trauma had existed that flared at these various points in her life. And that was so fascinating to follow that trail to the origin point of a health issue that was somewhat chronic for her, right? Um, okay, so now what, right? Now what do we do? So what she told me was, well, the next part was what can the body do to release it? There was some, ice and things like that. But for the most part, that was a very emotionally based issue. And so she took that information off. She went 2 days later, she called me and she said, my wrist is completely fine.
2 days.
And 2 days,
Wow.
she said, my wrist is fine. She said, she was able to process the emotions of the breakup in that period of that 48 hours. She realized what her body was trying to tell her. And she then started to process that. And that's what lightened up the pain in the wrist and helped it start to heal.
Mm.
Isn't that
Beautiful.
fascinating?
That
Isn't
that
that
is
fascinating?
that is fascinating. And again, we hear stories of that all the time, right? About you know um, these people with these transformations, and some might not even know it's medical intuition, right? Maybe it's from a mother and daughter, father and son, right? They pick up on something, and it's just like, oh, hey, maybe it's from this part of your childhood, or this experience. And it really reminds me, Wendy, of what you're talking about, of the case study aspect, right? Especially with healthcare providers, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to track drugs, right? Because it's you give a prescription, right? It's in the system, right? It goes through a pharmacy. There's a dosage, but with these types of testimonials, and it's probably the most powerful pieces of evidence, right? you know,
Mm.
you can do all the randomized controlled trials you want, but these are the real experiences that impacts people's lives, right? And like what you're mentioning, in just 2 days, right? That's unheard of. You can't make a RCT for that. And that's why I'm a big believer in the case study too. If there was a
Yeah.
system in place in all these medical offices, and that can account for these types of experiences, right? We won't you probably won't need to do much work at all. You'd be just traveling, and the evidence speaks for itself, right? Just talking about this. So that's really amazing. And sort of my follow up question to this is basically, what is the next steps that you see? You've been doing this for many years. You're literally leading the frontier in a paradigm shift in medicine. Where do we go with this information? How does that translate into the future?
Well, I will talk about a study that is currently in peer review. It's not as yet unpublished, so I can't talk about it, in too much depth. But I can tell you that it was a very many, really since 2020 when we had that first study published. I wanted to do this next one, and I got the opportunity to do this with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And the study consists of again, I believe 5 or 6 medical intuitives, along with, I think it was 6 doctors and 10 each of their patients, or something like that. I think we came out with 40 patients altogether. And the patients of their family medicine doctors uh, um, had chronic issues or hard to diagnose issues, or issues that were not responding to treatment. And so we thought, hey, let's just see what the medical intuitives can do. And they did brilliantly. And the goal of the study wasn't accuracy so much, even though we got high accuracy marks as I would have expected. It was about the value that the clinicians felt this could bring to their practice. That was the next step in my mind in terms of what we needed, because the patients and the clients you just read the testimonials. People love medical intuition. It answers so many questions for them. It illuminates so many mysteries, so to speak, for them, and they're able to find healing through that. So why not bring it into the clinical environment? I will tell you that all of the doctors that we worked with loved it, and saw the value of medical intuition in their practice as something that they might want to refer or even bring in to their practice, or that they would recommend to others. And that is like, whoo, off the charts. We can't wait to get that study published, because this is the kind of a missing piece. Medical intuitives, like just like me, have been working with doctors under the radar, out of the spotlight, out of any kind of understanding. uh, I want to say since the 1700s, because that's the first time in recorded history we saw that actually documented. So why not? What are we waiting for?
Yeah.
That's where the National Organization for Medical Intuition actually comes in. We
Mm.
started this organization as just conversations, with a working group of colleagues who've been in the field for various lengths of time, some of who've been doing it for over 40 years, and their experiences. And we realized just how much we really wanted to see this skill embraced, or at least accepted, by conventional healthcare and mainstream medicine, obviously integrative and functional medicine, because we see the value of it, and we see how it can support the health of everyone. Yeah.
Mm. Beautiful. From humble beginnings, right? And to the amazing research coming out now. And yeah, that's so fascinating, right? Because it's two sides of the coin, right? Now, if patients love it, right, clients love it, and now the healthcare practitioners, if they have a positive rating for it, there's that's all the green lights you need for things to continue to move forward and scale, which I'm so excited about, because
Yeah.
I see this big shift in medicine and just overall well-being, and I'm sure you see this too, Wendy, where we talk about whole person health, right, which is not just the physical, not just the emotional, but sort of this gray line of spiritual intuition, and so many people call it in different ways, connection to a higher purpose or source. And I want to comment on this, and I want to look at your comments as well, because this is a paradigm shift. This is a paradigm shift from materialism, right? Which a lot of science and researchers and doctors are so holding on to with for their dear life, because I feel like the evidence just from the medical intuition field is corroborating what so many other fields are showing as well. Especially
Hmm.
my expertise is in energy medicine, biofield therapies, which is showing the same thing, right? Which is the body has this field of information that we can tap into, right? Whether you can look at it, see it for information about someone's health, or you can use it very like an instrument to help facilitate healing. So, where do you kind of see medical intuition fitting in with this sort of paradigm shift? Because I feel like the term whole person health is going to be the new term for the next decades to come, because it really comes back to the principle of health and well-being, and especially with preventative medicine as well.
I'm right there with you. Remind me, your question is, what do I see in
Yeah,
terms
what do
of
you
what's
see in,
coming
in
forward?
terms of the paradigm shift in this post-materialism? Because you mentioned the word clairvoyance, which I love, and if you say that, it's like scattering the flies, right, in a room. Um, how does that fit in with the paradigm shift from medical intuition, and how do you see things kind of moving forward?
It's really a good question. I wish I honestly had a crystal ball about it, but
Oh,
it says the medical intuitive. Um, I don't know. I can tell you that right now there is more. I've been doing this work, like I said, more than 20 years, and it's only been in the last 7-ish years, um, maybe 10, yeah, about 10 years now that I think about it, that I've seen the healthcare world start to embrace these alternative ideas. And I hate that word alternative, because it's not alternative at all. Alternative to what? These ideas of the energy of the body, the biofield of the body, the spiritual nature of our minds. When you think about mind body medicine, and when it began here in the United States anyway, with the work of Carl Simonton in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and sure, certainly earlier than that. But the fact that he was laughed out of his milieu, when he started discussing meditation for his patients, and he was getting amazing results, but no one would listen. It's much different now. Obviously, it's much different. We have Chinese medicine, we have Ayurvedic medicine, we have naturopathic medicine. It's a much different environment now. There's yoga studios on every corner in just about every city in the United States. And what does that tell you? That tells you that, number one, the people want this. They resonate with this. It makes sense to them and it works for them. It heals for them. So the fact that the Western sort of, mechanical view and the gold standard doesn't really fit this model at all means the model has to change, right? Because people are asking for it. So, where is it going? I think more and better, more and better. I'm very privileged to do what I do. It's an honor for me to teach clinicians and healthcare practitioners and people of all kinds of wellness skill sets this work, because I believe it is, again, foundational. It's not a modality. It's not a specific treatment plan or anything like that. It's how to get to where you want to go with your health, physically, emotionally. So again, I teach people from the mental health care, certainly physical health care, even people who are I think you have to have an understanding spiritually somehow that there's something else, in the works here, that is an influence, in order to even be attracted to this kind of thing. But once you start to learn about it, it starts to make more and more sense. That's what I found for folks. That's what I hear from them. You asked me what the doctors are like. The very first conference I spoke at, there was a line of doctors after I talked, waiting to talk to me about their intuitive experiences and what a relief it was to be able to talk to somebody who even understood what they experienced, because they couldn't speak to their own colleagues about it
It's like
for
coming out
fear
of the
of being.
closet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For doctors, which is like, I wouldn't have thought about that, but it's another plus to what you're doing.
Yeah, it's really an exciting time, I think.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting time on the planet, that is for sure. But when it comes to this kind of thing, there are plenty of other countries on the planet where intuitive health is not a foreign concept. Intuitive health is the medicine, or it is understood as medicine. And that's what we're looking forward to really shifting in the United States with the National Organization for Medical Intuition, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, IONS, and a dozen, if not more, other organizations who are starting to bring the science to the spiritual, as you started out saying. Spirituality's always been there. The science is catching up. That's how I
Yeah.
see it.
Yes. Yeah. It's the yin and the yang, as I say. Something has
Mm,
to hold the water, but the water's always been there, right? It's
yeah,
like
that's
what
a
I
good
like to
way to
say
put
with
it.
science and spirit. Um,
Mm,
and to kind of really, help the audience close off on this, I know you mentioned about gut feeling, right? And
mhm.
not having bias, right? Eliminating bias, or practicing an unbiased perception. What is a practical, simple exercise for someone that's never heard of intuition before? What is a simple exercise that they can start incorporating in their daily lives? Maybe not to the point where they're seeing things in someone's wrist and seeing a movie play out, but maybe just a little suggestion, a little nudge towards a certain direction of intuition. What would that be?
I have lots of that. And on my website, thepracticalpath.com, if you go to the guided meditations, it's under services, I believe. Guided meditations, there's 4 free 5-minute guided meditations that will show you how to work with your own energy field, for one, and also to help kind of calm and center the mind and body and get that connected. So there's grounding exercises. There's what I call shielding, just kind of, putting a little protective bubble around you just so you feel safe. Bodies have to feel safe. They have a consciousness and they want to feel safe. And a few other things, but the one I want to point you to is called Your Body's Wisdom. And that is I believe that's on the website. It's a short little guided meditation where I show you how to turn inward and have a conversation with a body part, right? What does this body part want? What is it trying to tell me? What is it asking for? What does it not want a lot of? What does it want more of? These kinds of questions that we never think to ask our sore back, what do you want? Right? We think we know what it wants. We have some words in a book or things that people have told us, but what is it really telling us? What is it telling us physically, first of all? Because that's the most important thing when the body's hurting. What is it telling us emotionally? What is it telling us spiritually, mentally? And when we start to just quietly query in this way, you're actually using your intuition. It's almost a nonverbal kind of experience. And I recommend playing with that. There's also a bunch of exercises in my book. And also there is a workshop for everyone called Medical Intuition for Healing and Self-Care. And that is on the website as well. You can get on the waiting list for that's coming out very soon. And that's a whole program on how to do that, even deeper exercises. And so I encourage people to look that one up.
Amazing. And for the audience, I will leave all those links down below so that you can access those wonderful resources. And again, I'm always so curious because it just, the way you talk about it, Wendy, it just makes it so easy, right? It sounds like riding a bike. Yeah, anyone can do it, right? Just do this
Yeah.
this exercise. Start off with training wheels, but um, like I said, this is really amazing. This is huge, and it's
Thank you.
ushering you know so many people, and you are the top person that comes into mind for this field. But what I mentioned to all different other practices, all other mind body practices, it's speaking about the same thing, right? Coming back to that mind body connection. And you mentioned about spirituality and connecting to source, a higher purpose. And that guidance is different from what we're used to, right, with the left brain logical mind.
Hmm.
And as I've mentioned with the yin and yang, right, science and spirit, I do see these two really dancing very well in the coming future, because it's almost needed, especially in this time of uncertainty and chaos. It seems like, and there's so many
Mm,
health disparities, as we're going to talk
mm,
about in an upcoming conference, right? This type of
yeah.
practice is needed more than ever. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this work, Wendy. It's very inspiring for me as well. Just a student on the path like all of us. So thank you so much for your work, Wendy.
Oh, thank you. I'll drop this in if we have a moment. Um, I would like to see medical intuitives on staff at every clinic in every hospital, openly practicing acknowledged practice of medical intuition. I would like to see medical intuition as part of essential healthcare training. I'd like just to see it incorporated and embraced by mainstream healthcare and certainly alternative and functional healthcare. It's such an important skill set, and I really appreciate, Jason, your perspective on it. I'm right there with you, and I believe that we are moving into a time where is all possible.
So, Wendy, I'm sure a lot of people don't know, but there's actually a national organization for medical intuition, which I mentioned to you in your bio earlier. So, can you help the audience understand and where we can find more resources about that organization?
Yes, the National Organization for Medical Intuition, nomimedicalintuition.org. Go online and take a look. We have so many resources, articles, books, information about the skill and field of medical intuition. We have our Find a Practitioner directory where you can find a medical intuitive to work with. And we have memberships for anyone to become a supporting member, or if you're a professional medical intuitive, become a professional member. We've done research on medical intuition through NOMI. And there's just a lot of resources there. I'd also like to mention that my program is available, and any healthcare professionals that would like to know more about it, please go to thepracticalpath.com and you can email me directly about the program. Happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. So, thank you so much, Wendy. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure I can pick your brain for hours and hours. But for the audience that, we don't really have the time for it, I'll direct you to the book, Essentials of Medical Intuition, and also links and resources to Wendy's website, The Practical Path, and also the organization, the National Organization for Medical Intuition. So, thank you so much, Wendy. It's been a pleasure to speak with you again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person in August in California. I'm sure we'll connect more there. And yeah, just really excited for all the upcoming and amazing projects and all the research that you're doing. And I'm sure you've helped so many people. And, like I believe in, it's in giving that you receive, and all the amazing work that you're doing for all of us. It's truly meaningful. So thank you so much for your contributions.
Jason, thank you.